With global warming, the world in chaos and a zombie apocalypse just round the corner, what better time is there to hone up your survival skills? And what better way is there to do that than through the two dominant survival games of today? So let's do a side-by-side comparison of DayZ and Scum and see just how far you can get living in the wild. Roll the action sequence. Okay, let me start off by showing you a couple of things.
Look, a tobacco pouch. There's dwarves in these woods.
Okay, we'll stick the dwarves of the Hobbit up there, and I'm going to show you a old man, and that is real, by the way. And the dwarves are Scum, and the old man is DayZ. And I know by making that comparison, people are going to start writing hate comments, but there is a reason for this comparison. In the surviving of the land in the wilderness stakes, I found an absolutely stark difference between Scum and DayZ. The core of this difference sits simply with illness and disease and the impact it has on how you play the game. Now let me explain. Scum has a very tame illness system. You can feel unwell, you can get cold, but the impact on you is far from debilitating. I'd go so far to say that your characters are pretty stoic generally. They have a constitution like a dwarf. And this means the environment and its effects are not to be feared, and that in turn means your survival approach is easier, more painless and gentle. Now in DayZ it is very, very different. If you get sick and if you do not have meds, you can survive, but eventually you survive by just a thread. Your gameplay is hugely affected. And here is the thing, because you don't want that to happen, your survival approach needs to be cautious and prepared. It is far from gentle. Your characters in DayZ are as delicate as a flower, and they have the constitution of a 90-year-old man wandering naked in the Arctic. Truthfully, both are not very realistic. If they are trying to achieve that, that is. There is probably a happy place in between them somewhere. Now for those of you that are interested, the Scum devs have said that the survival illness aspect of the game is going to be amped up. If that does happen, I think it will probably be a big win for that game. Also, the survival gameplay in Scum feels a little bit incomplete, but does have an obvious path. Meaning that from the moment you start, the environment around you provides for you most of what you're going to need to progress. In other words, the environment enables you to craft most of what you're ever going to need. To a point, that is. DayZ does not have such a feel to it. The world around you is going to provide for you, but it will not provide to the level to keep you warm and cozy forever, and to fend off that enormous monster that lurks ever close in DayZ, illness. And once you get sick in the wild with nothing to counter it, it is going to be a slow, excruciating and inevitable death.
Can I ask you a question?
What?
How can we all have died at the same time?
The salmon moose.
Now, which of these two games do you prefer? Well, only you can answer that, but I'm going to give you some very quick highlights of my experience in both these games, and you'll sort of see what I mean and why I came to these conclusions. I hope you hang around for a few minutes. And if you do enjoy this type of content, please do consider hitting a like and a subscribe. That would be much appreciated. It does help me out quite a bit. Okay, let's start off with Scum. Now Scum spawns are somewhat dramatic, but I did end up in a temper area, so I started searching the ground for rocks, and from those I crafted myself a stone knife. And with that I cut down some bushes for sticks, and crafted myself rope and progressed towards making myself an improvised courier backpack. After equipping that I started making myself an axe, and first I made the axe head from the nearby stones, and then when I had all the mats, I finished it up. It would be good for defence and chopping things down. I then set off, but the river was fresh water, so I wouldn't go too far away from that, and it was not long before the first puppet tested my axe. A tad further along, I started making myself a campfire. I got that going, made myself a tool to get the campfire started, lit the campfire, and then moved on and got that blueprint down for the shelter and started chopping up wood to put the various sticks and materials. I was beginning to feel a bit chilly, so having a campfire running was important. I commenced just gathering logs and sticks, chopping up branches, cutting them down into smaller sticks and making the shelter, and it looks pretty good. I was definitely starting to get cold as the weather was changing. I think it looked pretty good, really. I then moved on to make myself a bow. This was going to be useful for hunting. And after doing that, I then got straight into making some simple wooden arrows. And after completing some of those, I was noticing that I wasn't alone here. There were some wild animals around, but I wasn't going to take them on right now. With all the chopping and cutting, my axe didn't last long, so I crafted myself a new one. I kept that fire stoked up, but I was primarily focused on finishing this bed, and I had to take my shirt off to get the rags for it, but it was looking good. Then it was time for a lie down and just enjoy myself. But after that, I headed off to do some hunting, and there was growling nearby, and that indicated a wolf, and there was no way I was going to take that on. I was getting a little bit peckish, and I found myself some grubs to eat. They would give me a little boost. I headed into town because I needed some nails for a storage box, saw a raven and did the most amazing shot you've ever seen with a bow, chopped this raven up and neatly laid out its goods on the ground in front of me. I chopped up the breast meat, and then I went back to a zombie I'd killed earlier on, or a puppet, call it you want, and took the nails off the body. Excellent. Back at the camp, I cooked up the meat from the raven. Nothing like a bit of raven meat. Yum yum.
This is why you need a raven.
Yeah, you do need ravens to eat. I finished up the storage box. That's why I needed those nails, so I could now start putting some goods in it, and I just continued to hack and chop up all the wood around me to get some future resources. Now, at this point in time, I was getting cold, so I headed into town to get myself some clothes. I'm not sure if this was a good idea, because I rapidly came across, well, rather a lot of puppets. Fortunately, I am fast as a little whippet, and headed out. I healed myself up, and with the cries of the puppets in the background, headed back in to continue the hunt for a decent set of clothes. Puppets were bloody everywhere, and I was constantly having to treat all the various injuries until I came across the fastest puppet ever known. I mean, this thing moved so fast, it was ridiculous. And it beat the crap out of me. I wasn't looking in good shape, but after a while I did heal myself up, went to move on again, and sure enough came across more puppets, and decided that the best course was to get the hell out of there, but that didn't work out. I spawned back in over an ice area and noticed immediately that I had nice warm clothes on. I was going to keep those. I started heading back to my base, running across the terrain, and I wasn't always alone. Eventually I got back, and yep, it was good to see my little campsite. It was looking excellent. I decided to hunt myself a boar, and I realized that they ran away rather fast. So I was back to hunting ravens again. Well, trying to at the very least. I was constantly looking for birds in the sky and spotting where they land, because that was my source of food. But then this happened. Now at this point I was absolutely shitting myself because I was determined not to die. And Yogi would not let me go. And just to add to the mix, let's throw in a puppet. Now for some bizarre reason, the puppet scared away the bear, and I was pretty happy with that. Took down the puppet, and I was looking a bit worse for wear, that is for sure. Crafted myself up some bone needles so that I could commence making a better backpack. Ripped up all the clothing and moved on to a small improvised backpack. This would give me a little bit more storage capability. And I'll be honest, it actually looks pretty cool too. I headed back to all the various puppets. By now I was realizing I needed to use the resources on these puppets a lot more. I was scavenging everything off them until eventually I made myself a improvised quiver. This would give me a little bit more room in my backpack by holding the various arrows, and you guessed it, I was back to hunting ravens again, but I was getting pretty damn good at it by this stage. I neatly laid out all their goods, took the meat, came across another raven, and sure enough, nailed it again. But, oh, there's a grasshopper, let's eat that. Oh, why not? There's some white mushroom on the ground, let's eat that as well. Took the meat back, cooked it all up. It started to rain, so I got into my shelter. This is what it was here for after all. And then took on my boar again. I knew it'd take 2 bow shots, I had to nail the second one. And I did. So I commenced to chop up the, what the fuck is that? I don't know, some twisted log, but that is the boar. Got my first boar hide, I was super happy with that. Chopped up the rest of the carcass and realised there was an absolute ton of meat. This was enough to feed a little army. I certainly didn't need all this, but what the hell, I just took what I needed and I crafted as many mats as I could. Needles, took the fat, took the meat, and moved on to making myself a leather or animal skin jacket. Now it was about this point I realised that I couldn't do too much more in the wild without spending a lot of time searching for advanced materials in the cities. And this was about as far as you can get by living purely within the wild. So my Scum wilderness survival journey was actually quite a lot of fun. It was relatively painless. It was quite enjoyable. But this is about as far as you're going to get. Now, as you would expect, DayZ is not going to be the same journey. Didn't take long before I spawned in to get into zombie trouble. Had to punch my way out of that one ultimately. Did come across a pea coat. Now this gives the best insulation and I'm going to need that, so I put that on. And I figured that as I killed zombies along the way, it was fair enough to take the goods that I found off them. But I didn't get far because it just rained all the bloody time. And I figured that I was not alone. Don't forget I am playing on official servers here, and that led me to be a little bit more cautious. But I couldn't get too far because, yeah, the rain did not stop coming. Now some of the rules I have been playing here is I'm not taking advanced weaponry or gear. I'm just sticking to pretty simplistic survival tools. That might include things like water, or maybe even a flare, or other bits and pieces. I could scavenge along the way, of course, and I did find this poor chap. He didn't have much on him of use, but he did have a fishing rod. Yet again, it did not get far before it rained. During the night, I was travelling along and I came across a chicken, and of course I got myself way too cold and I got my first cold. This turned out to be a mistake. However, I did try to advance my game. I continued by cooking myself up the chicken that I had found and getting the fireplace going and warming myself because I was starving. But my cold was not getting better. And one might say it was getting pretty bad. And keep in mind, I was just trying to get to a suitable campsite. I hadn't even really started my survival adventure yet. But I did get myself to Zelenogorsk, and there I found myself some tetralysin, whatever you call it, pills. Basically almost like antibiotics. I popped those and I was pretty confident that these would get rid of my cold or flu symptoms. Didn't get too far because, well, I came across a pack of wolves, so ran for my life, hid in the small booth, and had to wait this one out. I did continue to the military camp because I wanted some better gear. I was pretty cautious because I knew there were players around, but I wasn't cautious enough. After that, I spawned back in. Now this time around I was going to keep myself warm by making fireplaces, and I used my first fireplace to cook up a bit of chicken. But further in, I found myself a well and hydrated myself. As I moved along I got cold again, so had to build another fireplace. And I had to wait for that warmth buff. That would keep me warm for about 10 to 15 minutes until I needed to make myself another fireplace. I used these moments to cook the food and just chill out. A bit further along I found a decent spot, so started working on my first shelter. This required a lot of sticks, so I pulled the branches of the trees off and started shoving them in, and it was going to require 50 sticks to get it up and running. So it was a lot of chopping and splitting sticks. But I did eventually get a little bit tired of just collecting sticks and taking them back, so I started working on a plot. As I headed into town again, I had to run away from some wolves and got trapped inside a house with one of them. I quickly killed that, and after killing it, commenced skinning it. And I was going to use all its bits and pieces for the various mats it can provide. As I headed out again, more wolves attacked me. But they seemed to be coming in singles, so I thought it was okay to take them on. I did get a couple more visitors, killed a couple more wolves, and had to bandage myself up. But that provided me a lot of materials, including hooks, and I could fashion ropes, and I had tons of meat. So I headed back to my campsite. Back at the campsite I planted some seeds that I'd found in the town. Use a water bottle to water the seeds. Then made myself a fireplace just to keep myself warm. I'd learned that lesson. So the area I'd selected, it was relatively close to a town and in a relatively temperate zone. It was a good location for a camp. I cooked up some of this wolf meat, but I still had to wander into town for various supplies. And in one of those visits I found myself a tripod, so I made myself another fireplace and got this tripod up and running. The camp was beginning to look almost semi-professional. I was quite happy with it, to be honest. And my zucchinis were growing. Very exciting news. I went along and gathered some of these zucchinis. They didn't look the best, but hey, what the hell. And then I completed my shelter. It looks pretty flimsy, but the campsite is definitely coming along. I obviously dropped a couple of zucchinis, so went and picked some of those up. The good thing about these improvised shelters is they do have some storage capability. Because I was actually quite well supplied with food and water by this time. But I wanted to prepare myself for the future, so I pulled out all the plant material and then used that as fertilizer for the plots themselves, just so I could keep the food coming. But I wanted to continue and up the game, so I made myself a improvised fishing rod. Used one of the hooks that I'd fashioned earlier on. Dug up some worms. That's your bait right there. And then cast my crappy little line into this crappy little scum-filled pond. Didn't take long before I had my first catch. And I'm not going to lie, I was looking forward to seeing what my first fish looked like. But it looked like a pair of boots, apparently. Moved up a bit further and cast my line into the slightly deeper water. Maybe this time. Yeah, I got myself a carp. That was good. A bit of variation to the food supply. I was just crafting myself a stone knife when, you guessed it, my little bloody friends visited again. I'm not sure how many times I got attacked by wolves, but it was a lot. I hid from them and had to bandage and wait them out again. At one point I had to log off, so I logged back in and headed back to my camp. Thought I saw some movement over there, but maybe I was wrong. My tripod campfire had vanished. So I made myself another campfire. Warmed myself up and cooked up, you guessed it, that fish. Then it was time to wave it in the camera just to show it off. But I was concerned that my fireplace was always vanishing, so I figured if I put a stone ring around it, that would make it permanent. I had a pickaxe from earlier, so I hacked a nearby rock up, got back to my camp and made that stone ring and was pretty satisfied. But now I had made about 4 or 5 different fireplaces and I was hoping that this one would be permanent. It had been a long day, so I logged off. When I logged back on, yeah, you could have guessed it, it had vanished. And at this point in time, the cat was interfering with my microphone. While I enticed the needy cat onto my lap, I contemplated whether it was worth continuing, and I decided it wasn't. I was going to end up having to traipse large miles to find very small products to progress my campsite, and it really wasn't worth it because I'd proven the point. This is what you can pretty much get to in DayZ relatively easily. So my DayZ wilderness survival journey required a lot of prep, and it felt really hard earned, and it was quite painful. I'm not sure I enjoyed it any more than the Scum one. It was different, to say the least. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and don't forget to like and subscribe and all that juicy stuff. See you in the next chapter.